This is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Ben Kinsley is with me this evening as co-host and co-producer.
Thanks, Pat.
Ben, nice to see you again. And return guest, Jill Krowinski, who is the chair of the Democratic House Caucus. Welcome, Jill, again.
Thank you for having me back.
This is the third time you're on a roll here. We asked Jill to come on the show last year. If you'll remember, we had the heads of the caucuses for the Democrats, Jill, and for the Progressives and Republicans. And we had them in the beginning of the year and at the end of the year just to see how things went for them and what we could expect for this year. And here we are. So we've invited the same group back, and we would just, before we get started, though, you've got to do a little on who you are, a little background.
Oh, yes. Yes,
That's important.
So I represent the Old North End in downtown Burlington with Representative Kurt McCormick, who I think you may have served with at one point or another.
Yes.
Yep, Kurt McCormick. And I've been in the legislature since 2012. A majority of my professional life, I worked at Planned Parenthood of Northern New England, and I left last year when I took on the role as majority leader. And so it's been an exciting first year with this role under my belt, and I'm looking forward to another session.
You will be interested. 2 weeks ago, a week ago, we had Kurt Wright and the chair of the Burlington Council to talk about the sale of Burlington Telecom.
Yes.
You'll have to look for that. It was a great show. I sent
Yeah.
it to CCTV Channel 17, so they may air it there.
Burlington station.
So we're everywhere, people. Just keep listening. So anyway, and how long have you been sort of in? When did you last year wasn't your first year.
As majority leader, it was.
As majority leader.
Yeah. And I was appointed to the legislature by Governor Shumlin in 2012.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. You filled a position.
Yeah, Representative Rachel Weston got this amazing job opportunity and doing democracy building work abroad, and so I went for the appointment. I think there were 6 or 7 of us that went.
Wow, that's pretty competitive.
Yeah,
usually there's only there's usually only 2 or 3 for an appointment. And what do you do outside the legislature now?
Well, right now, my husband and I are working on restoring a house.
Very cool.
So when I'm not wearing suits, I'm in my Carhartts working away.
Awesome.
Can't beat Carhartts.
I know. So we invited you back on the show to kind of give us a look ahead at what people can anticipate for the 2018 legislative session. What big initiatives do you expect to come through the House of Representatives this year, and what should people be looking out for?
Sure. Well, I want to start just by saying that we've really set our eye on the goal of creating an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few. And so you'll see a lot of our work being done around creating a paid family leave policy, so everyone has access to paid time off. They don't have to choose between their job or welcoming a newborn and having to make those decisions. And we passed that last year out of the House, and it's currently in the Senate. But that is a top priority for us. So we're working with our friends in the Senate to get that back over to the House so that we can get that to the governor.
And I know that there's a couple business groups like Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility. This is a top tier issue for them, as well as the Main Street Alliance. I know that they're working on this very hard as well. Working on it from the side of productivity, right? You want to have employees who have access to these benefits so they can participate in the workforce and not feel like they have to choose between a job.
And it's not just babies, it's taking care of old people like me, right? I could get paid for watching my husband at home.
Or taking care of yourself if you have a serious medical issue. And I think there's some of the themes that we're hearing with conversations with business owners is that in Vermont, a majority of our businesses are small businesses, and in order to compete for high quality workers, being able to kind of level the playing field for them by having this benefit available gives them a leg up. So it goes out to recruitment, retention, and really helps our small businesses in Vermont.
Well, I was just having this conversation with several business leaders in the state around, we have our workforce is so stretched right now because we've got so few available workers, and there's still the number of job openings are far exceed the number of workers that are seeking job positions. We have to start getting creative about how to engage people in our workforce that we aren't engaging now. So people that are perhaps retired, or on the flip side, have maybe a high school level education, and need certain types of training in order to get them into roles that we're seeking. And also, people that aren't participating in the workforce for a variety of reasons, like caring for a family member, or they have a newborn baby, or any of those things, because we have such demand for employment in Vermont that we've got to start getting creative about how we engage people that aren't currently engaged in the economy.
Yeah, I just actually saw the most recent fiscal update that showed that we're doing really well in Vermont. Our unemployment rate is very, very low. Our unemployment insurance claims are really low, and that's great, but there is that theme out there, and I think that policies like paid family leave, but also continuing the work we've done on expanding workforce development,
Totally.
and another priority of ours with continuing tech ed, I think is really important.
You have my vote 100%. I love tech ed. I'm going to do it quickly because we talk too much sometimes.
Yes, we do.
I work for a Swiss company. I work down and they have over in Switzerland, they are so big on tech ed that they sit on the board of directors of the tech ed schools.
Yep.
And when I used to go over and recruit students from the tech ed school over there, it was a tough job, but I did it. I came back, and you would think I was bringing back students from Yale and Harvard because the people in my company understood the benefit of a really good tech education. They were thrilled to have these kids come over here and work. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's critical, and that is definitely something our education committee will be taking a look
That's
at.
great.
Yeah.
That's good.
So what other issues are you focusing on, aside from paid family leave this session, that are kind of top priorities?
Sure. Well, I will add that another bill that we sent over to the Senate last year that we would like back to get to the governor is a bill protecting domestic violence victims. So it's H. Bill 422. And basically what that does is creates a cooling off period when there's a gun in the home during a domestic violence situation. We have a horrible, horrible track record in our state when it comes to domestic violence. And if there is one thing that we can do that will save lives, I think we need to do it. So that is a top priority for us.
Can I ask you, how does that work, a cooling off period? You remove the gun from the house?
Sure, so it gives police the authority if they come into a home, there's been someone accused or cited, and there is a gun, visibly like sitting on the table. The officer has the authority to take it for a 5-day period.
Oh, okay.
So, so for 5 days. So this we're talking like less than a week.
Yes.
And interesting. So is that like people, they can investigate further about whether or not there was any legitimacy to the domestic violence claim? Like what is that getting at if you're not arresting the person on the spot?
Well, what research shows is that it's that time when there's police presence or there's an escalating situation where there's a shooting, where there's violence. And so simply by just taking the gun out of this situation, it helps prevent something from happening. It's been done in other states. It's been effective. Numbers do go down when laws like this pass. So we think this is one way that we can help with this problem.
Well, it's interesting, I think, because there's a fair amount of resistance in Vermont to any bill involving restrictions on firearms. But I think there's some sense here, because this isn't really a firearms issue. This is a domestic assault issue.
Right. Yeah.
And if you have someone who you suspect of being in a potentially dangerous situation, you want to make sure that
I
they're
think
safe.
there'd be objection if they took the license away.
Right, that's a different question.
Right.
This is 5 days.
Let's be clear. This is it's in a safe space that is very temporary. And again, we've seen in other states that it's been effective.
that's
So
Even with a short window like 5 days, it's been interesting.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, I don't know. I think domestic violence, it's a trigger point. It's a flash where you go up angry, and it's not like you're, maybe I'm completely wrong and I apologize, but it seems to me it's an instant you're mad and then it sort of de-escalates, I
calm
think.
down,
Right.
So who knows?
So 422 is another priority of ours. We are working on a couple pieces of legislation that I want to highlight for you. We are working on a way to deal with a long-term solution to cleaning up our water in the state. Last session we passed a short-term plan, and I think it's really important that we do not kick the can down the road. Clean water in the state is too important. It's a public health issue. It's an economic issue.
Right.
It's really reflective of who we are in Vermont, and taking care of what's so important. And so clean water funding is definitely a priority. We're also doing work around efficiency standards. So
good.
I don't know if last year we passed a bill that created and codified efficiency standards for appliances. So with the Trump administration and the new leadership at the EPA and other various agencies, there's a lot of concerns that we're going to start moving backwards when it comes to efficiencies
Regulations.
regulations. And so last year we looked at appliances, and this year we're looking at electronics, to keep on doing that work, to draw the line, but also start pushing us to go forward. If this kind of work is not going to happen at the federal level, we need to do it at the state level. And it's good for the economy, it's good for our pocketbooks, and so that's another one that we're working hard on.
So looking at things like, you can only sell Energy Star rated appliances, or there's incentives for buying Energy Star, certified appliances and things like that. That's kind of the idea.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's good. So what we wanted to do, since you walked in the door, January what, 3rd?
Third, yes.
Third.
Yes.
You have had one bill after another, one time particularly marijuana, and here it is. What time is it? 4:30. We don't know if the governor signed it.
Oh, yeah,
he's
Oh, he
about-
did
he did.
sign
He
it.
did sign it.
Oh, he
Okay.
did.
Yeah, he did.
All right, you've heard it here first. Because I know that everybody was calling the State House all day. Apparently, has he signed it? Has he signed it? But,
Yes. So we did take that up. If just to refresh everyone's memory, the governor vetoed the bill that legalized marijuana, allows for a small amount of possession and to grow a couple plants at home.
Right,
And he vetoed it. We worked on a compromise together. The Senate had passed it at the veto session, and we tried to bring it up. But the House Republicans blocked the ability for us to take it up. So it was sitting all summer and
Right,
fall on our
right.
agenda for us to take up first thing. And so we took it up and we voted it out and got it to the governor.
And obviously, the Democratic Party was supportive of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
What are the differences between this bill and the bill that the governor vetoed originally? I know that he had some concerns that he asked the legislature to address, and so what were the changes that were
The
made?
primary ones were around offenses for selling to minors or being around minors. So, for example, we have a law that says you can't be in a car with a child and smoke a cigarette. So it either brought marijuana up to the same level that we have with alcohol or tobacco, or took it even farther and more stricter. So that was a majority.
And there's still a legal age on marijuana consumption, correct? It's 21.
It's 21.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Were any of your, the governor last year had put together this committee to look at marijuana and to come back with the commission. And all of this happened before the commission, you can tell where I stand on this, before the commission's report came out. I just thought, I don't even know if they supported it or not. They had some concerns. But I think it would have been better if we had waited for that report and hopefully support, if you were voting for it, to support the vote yes. I just thought it was bad form.
So we have several legislators who are on that commission that the governor appointed, and we were monitoring the conversations happening very closely. We were all involved in them. And so when they started talking about what the report would look like, it wasn't different from what everyone had already come to on a compromise, really for what we were looking at. In the scope of this bill, I think there is the larger conversation about tax and regulate, where this commission is continuing. This report was only one piece of a larger project or scope of work that they have to look at. So we're going to be getting another report back from them about suggestions or recommendations, or the whole scope on tax and regulate. So that commission is, I believe, still moving along.
Because I think everybody figures next year is going to be a different bill,
Yeah.
expanding it to commercial.
Well, I think, the tax and regulate piece is a lot more complicated too than the home grow model, and because there's a lot more that goes into it. I think, and we're still learning some lessons from Colorado and the system that they have. I think there's benefits in the way that Vermont's doing it because it's the legislature that's driving the conversation. It's not a referendum vote that's driving the conversation where, we have to do this and we have to figure out in like 24 months how to make it work.
Yeah, I
So-
mean, in other states, it's been a big problem, and it really limits the conversation. So I think, we're doing it the Vermont way. We're doing it one step at a time. And
Yeah.
Somebody should write a little story about that you were being advised as you went along. Most of the people that I know were very upset and expressed themselves on Facebook that they thought it was bad that they didn't wait for the report. It would be good to know that you did know what was.
Yeah, we were very much.
That's a good thing.
We were getting regular updates as
Yeah,
well as the
good.
governor. So,
Well, it's
and,
just.
I would just say if the report had something in it that was that much of a red flag, I would have expected the governor to
Yeah, to
signal
say
that
that,
he
yeah.
wasn't, and he was supportive through.
Right.
So.
So it'll be interesting to see where their future report. When's the next piece scheduled to come out?
Oh, you're really testing me, Ben.
Sorry.
I would have to get back to you on
Okay,
that one.
that's fair enough. I think it's interesting because this whole tax and regulate discussion, we could spend the rest of the show talking about this, so I'll keep it brief. But I think I hear people all the time saying, just tax it and that'll solve all of our budget problems or whatever. You can stop property taxes from going up or all these things, and I'm like, first, you got to set the taxes low enough that you're competitive with the black market, right? Because the whole idea to make it a safer marketplace is you have to get rid of the black market. So you have to have prices low enough to compete to force the black market out, and then so you can't just like levy 50% taxes on retail sales of marijuana because you're never going to get rid of the black market. So it's tricky. It's a tricky,
And it's here.
yeah.
Right,
So-
and I think that's the important point to make, and that's what we talked a lot about, is listen, we want to talk about safety, we need to bring it out of the darkness and
Right.
find ways.
Right,
Exactly,
Right.
and you need a regulatory system and all this stuff, but and so taxes to cover that, but you really beyond that, you're going to start getting into a situation where you're not going to get rid of a black market because if the prices are so high, people are going to try to circumnavigate it.
That's a few years away, we hope.
Well, that's why I'll be interested to see what the report says
Yeah,
and what they think
Right.
that balance
Right,
is.
and I think it'll be a hot topic on the campaign trail.
Probably,
fall.
I'm
yeah,
sure it
probably will be.
So we went through some of the hot topics, speaking of hot topics, and that we know you're going to be talking about, and we just thought, let's just run them by you, see whether you're for or against. But it's sort of like one of those, do this, instant response, right? But carbon tax.
So there have been a couple of different proposals in the House and the Senate on this,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you're curious about a specific.
Well, we do know about the Essex.
The Essex
Essex
plan was one
plan,
everyone
yeah.
seems to be talking about.
So, so what I would say is I think our House Speaker, Mitzi Johnson, has a great vision with how we tackle climate change. First of all, we agree that it needs to be a regional approach, that we can't do something at that scale by ourselves in Vermont. Right. So what she has the legislature to do is to have every committee take a look at climate change within their jurisdiction. So for example, Human Services, we have a big rate increase with Lyme disease, with cases of asthma. That's really, so to think outside of just literally the Energy and Technology Committee and taking a broader look to see, we can have this conversation in transportation, that's for sure.
Right.
In our buildings, in our state buildings, what are we doing to make sure that so I think she's really kind of creating a different vision of how we can take this up to a 20,000 foot level and have a more comprehensive approach. So that is our goal for this session, and the committees are starting to do that work.
And then reach out to the other states to do a regional.
There's
event.
a whole group working on that.
Because we're pretty small, and we were talking about it the other day with Robin Chestnut Town.
Right, yep.
That whatever we do, it's a pretty minuscule on the scale to move the needle, because we're a pretty small state, and yet you want to set an example.
Right.
But he was saying, but regionally would be and I think the governor too was talking regional, wasn't he?
I believe that he said anything would have to be regional.
Yeah.
I believe that's what he said.
Yeah. I think
So that's really are most of the House Republicans behind that strategy of a regional approach? Because I know that the progressives are favor a carbon tax, or at least some sort of recapture mechanism.
I can't speak for the House Republicans. I don't know where they are on this issue. I do know within my caucus, folks are very eager to start really tackling the cost of energy, like looking at increasing weatherization funding, looking at ways to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. There's so much work to be done there
Right,
that
it's
we can do.
Because you're
Yeah.
even just talking about Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I never thought of that as part of the climate change, but it is.
But it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
And
longer
this year,
season.
it went
Yeah.
past into Christmas and beyond. They had an emergency alert put out for ticks because they're usually gone by Thanksgiving. And this year they said it was going to go through Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, even our vet, when we took
Yeah.
our sweet pup in, they were like, don't forget to keep up with her tick medicine. And it
Yeah.
was just like, oh my gosh. Like,
Yeah.
this
Right.
is
Don't even think about it
Don't-
in
Yeah.
December, you know.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So the other last one on my list, and Ben's got a list, is the $15 minimum wage.
Sure.
Where are you all on that?
So they're just like, with big issues like this, there are a lot of different proposals out. What our House Democrats feel strongly about is putting a system in that does it very gradually over several years. So there's this misconception out there that when we say 15 an hour, we want to raise it next year to 15. That's not going to work.
Right.
What we hear from small businesses, we can do this, but it needs to be over time. And so I think the question is, over how many years does it work
Right.
for our workers and our businesses?
Do you take into consideration the cost of providing benefits for employees? Because that's a huge expense.
Yeah, so that's been a part of the conversation I've heard, and the Senate is taking the lead on this. So we don't have this happening in the House right now. But I know the study commission, there's a study group over the summer and fall that looked at this and made recommendations, and I believe that was part of the conversation there
'cause
too.
that can be pretty expensive if you get the whole gamut of benefits from health care to
Sure.
vacation and whatever else is thrown into the pot. It's big bucks
Yeah,
for the
and-
small employer.
Yeah, and I'll say, healthcare and housing are other two factors
Right.
that we hear a lot about. And so we are looking at possible ways to increase access to affordable housing. And with health insurance, I mean, given what's happening in Washington, there are so many different things that we may have to step up and
Right,
deal with
right.
because of their actions in chipping away at the Affordable Care Act. If we don't get long-term funding for CHIP, children's health care, that's a big. That's
Hopefully they
important.
resolve that today because they said they found a way to get back to work here. So maybe CHIP will be on the table because that was a little unnerving.
It's really infuriating because I think if there's one thing we should be able to agree on, it's taking care of our kids and making sure they have
Yeah.
access to health care.
I know. What's crazy is like both sides agree on this issue, and it's just they're letting it get
it's
derailed by other like extraneous things.
Right,
You know,
like politics.
like politics.
Well, I mean, we need this to be, a long-term solution for that because funding and thinking about our state budgets and how we fund for the long term, and if it's not clear and it's these short like stopgaps of
Right.
we'll do it for 4 months or 5. I mean, it creates a very unstable budgeting
Right.
process
Right.
and
It's
world
really,
for us.
yeah, it's really crazy for everyone involved.
Yeah.
I was going to look it up. I don't think that Washington has passed an actual balanced budget in,
2005.
was it 2005?
I think it's
been years because
2005.
they've done all this continuing, the
Yeah.
CR, continuing resolution. They've never really sat down and balanced the budget.
Yeah, because the budget's supposed to be for
That's sad.
4 or 6 years. I can't
Yeah,
remember,
right.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Sad.
that's
So last one on my list is that, and you come from Burlington, so I don't know if our legislature will get involved in this, but the safe drug injection sites, is that something the legislature will take a look at? It's obviously something in Burlington.
Yeah, so our Chittenden County State's Attorney, Sarah George, has
Right.
put this idea on the table. There's legislation that was introduced in the House and in
Oh.
the Senate. Senate Judiciary took it up and decided that it wasn't the right time to move forward with it. So I think what we would all like to see happen is to better understand the pros and cons and to have more work done to explore what that means. I mean, and the reality is right now there are so many more things we can be doing to increase access to treatment, access to housing. We still have people who are in our emergency departments who need access to beds outside. Right. So those are places where we know there are problems that we are continue to do work to address that. And so that's where we're going to be putting our focus.
Right.
Well, that leads right into the next question, which is opioid crisis, right? And what we can do. This is a perennial issue now, and it seems to just keep getting bigger and bigger every year, and it affects. We had Jolinda LeClaire on in the fall, and she's for our viewers, she's the head of the Opioid Coordination Council. They just came out with a report 2 weeks ago about here are the things we should be doing as a coordinated across state government, what we should be doing. Because there's basically no department that's not affected by this across the board.
No individual in Vermont.
And just about, everyone in Vermont's pretty much affected in some way or another.
That's true.
So it's a huge issue. Is there any active ideas in the legislature on how to move forward?
Well, it's the emergency department is sort of a hot topic right now that we're continuing to do work on. I think when it comes to the budget, prioritizing funding to keep on doing what we need to get the workers to be able to provide the treatment and to expand the treatment,
because that's been today. There's a shortage of workers, aren't there, in Vermont, of healthcare workers. So
we increased the wages for a group of employees to help sort of provide more incentive for that. So we're watching those numbers closely. A more of a long-term conversation we've been having is around adverse childhood effects. I don't know if you've heard of this, but we've been really starting to look at what can we do on the prevention side so that we can eliminate some of these triggers that get us to where we are today with the opioid crisis.
Yeah, get ahead of it.
To get ahead of it. And so our Human Services Committee and the Senate Human Services committees are looking at ways that we can provide increased screenings and tools for providers to start doing that work. And I think if we can be looking not only at how can we address the short-term hot button issues, but also be able to look broader to say, what are these things that we can be doing, upstream to help get ahead of it. And so that is one thing that I think is a priority that will get done, that can at least get some resources and tools into place around mental health.
Because they've seen the Prevent Child Abuse Vermont organization, the numbers were way down for a while, and because of the opioid crisis, they've seen the numbers going up, but it's more neglect that people just are so busy getting high that they kind of forget that they've got kids to take care of, and that's what those numbers are. It's really bad.
But it really goes to show the impact that this has, because there are housing issues around it. I mean, we are seeing that this is affecting our kids in schools more and more, and the schools are having to come into play to help take care of it. And so it's really, it's just created this really intense situation for us to try to wrap our hands around and deal with.
All other states, or many other states, are having the same problem.
Absolutely.
Is there any coordination of this? We did this in Idaho, and it worked.
Well, I'm proud to say that our work around the hub and spoke model in Vermont has been used and replicated. Other states are looking to use our model. So I do think that we're doing good work. I think keeping it a top priority is what needs to happen, and we're going to stay laser focused on making sure we can take care of this problem.
Very cool. I think it's going to take a commitment like that, sustained over a number of years. I mean, you look at a situation like this, and really the only thing to compare it to is like the campaign to end smoking, right? And that's really the only point of comparison we have for sustained, multi-decade campaign to knock those numbers down. And where we are today versus 20 years ago it's a whole different landscape. On that issue.
Yeah, the smoking rates have gone down, which is tremendous. But now we have to deal with e-cigarettes and these
other
other alternatives. It's like a whole different,
whole different set of issues.
Whole different set of issues.
But I think that gives us some hope that we can address an issue like this.
Right.
But
we just don't leave the pressure up.
But you gotta. I mean, even today, you still see the ads on TV and you have to, because it's that constant messaging. And I think we can be successful with the opioid crisis as well over that type of sustained period of time, but it's getting there, and I think you're right about focusing early on the prevention, because it's a lot easier to address it on that end.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the kind of similar to that, I guess, the correctional facility proposal in St. Albans that came out a
Could
week
you
and a half
explain
ago.
to our viewers, those who may not know about the governor's proposal?
Sure. Well, so last year the legislature asked for the administration to come back with some proposals around corrections. So I think we all agree that we want to bring our offenders that are out of state back to Vermont.
I agree.
We have some facilities that are in dire need of repair. They're not set up to provide the services needed. And so one of the ideas that the administration put on the table was to create a 900-some bed facility in St. Albans that would be built by a private company. I don't know if it would be run by the private company as well. We're still looking at the details of it. I think, my concern is that I don't want to be building new correctional facilities. I want to find a way that we can reduce the number of people that we're putting into the correctional facilities. We've been working really hard over the past several years around restorative justice. If people have a drug problem and they're going into jail, to treat the drug problem first, to take care of them, to get them access to treatment.
Yeah.
We've started to do some medication and treatment in jails now. So I think for us, we want to have a conversation of how can we bring these offenders home, and how can we better, how can we make the institutions that we have right now work? Because that's the problem. And so, nothing is a done deal. I know some people heard it like it's being built. Oh my gosh! I'm like, no.
Because you put that out last week. So
Yes,
a lot of
this is
discussion.
one proposal of several proposals out there. I know the women's prison in South Burlington has some major problems. Not only with literally building issues, but also around services for women. And we really want to try to find ways to keep families together. And the facility is just not quite working.
Is Windsor open or closed?
Windsor is closed. Looking for other ways to use it.
Use that. Oh, because what a beautiful, if a prison can be beautiful, it's a beautiful landscape. It's on a wonderful plot of land. It's open and it's very nice. I knew the governor had wanted to close that. I didn't.
I have not been to that facility, but I have heard that it's very unique.
Yeah, it is. And they put the inmates are put to work, and mostly outside on projects and stuff, and it's a really lovely piece of property.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think the proposal anyway, because we do need to build more capacity in order to bring some people home. It's an interesting way of doing it, because my understanding is it's private investment, so the state doesn't have to make the upfront investment in it. But then ownership transfers to the state after 30 years or something like that.
VSEA is not very happy.
Well, it's because it's not going to be state employees.
Yeah. Well, it will have state employees.
Oh, it will.
Carolyn Brannigan, Representative Brannigan was responding to me on Facebook, and she said it will be state employees, and I don't know how that relationship will work, but I thought they were going to put in state employees.
Well, I'll have to figure that out.
Well, so they've started the conversation.
Well, and who knows what could come out of it, because that's how good solutions happen. Start talking.
That's right.
So I know this is tomorrow, but the governor's planning to propose some education ideas around how to reduce the cost of primary and secondary education in Vermont. So he leaked, or someone in the administration put out some of the initial thoughts on what the governor is going to likely be proposing tomorrow. And it includes caps on spending, which is something that was considered during the Act 46 discussion. It also includes mandatory staff reductions to address the student-teacher ratio. And there's a couple other...
Must be 80-20 healthcare in there somewhere.
I didn't see that as one of them. I'm sure that's probably going to be a discussion that he'll put back on the
It
table
sure was
too.
last year.
Yeah, sure, definitely was last year.
Yes.
Say so.
Exactly.
So what? I know that there hasn't been a whole lot of time for people to mull it over, but what was the initial reaction to
Right.
that?
Well, I would just start by saying, putting forth a proposal to cut teachers and school staff, I mean, that would result in one of the biggest, most recent layoffs in history in Vermont. And I'm not sure having more people unemployed is the way that we deal with our challenges right now that our state is facing. And like I said earlier, schools are facing an incredible amount of complex family challenges. And so I really think that, on this topic, the local community should be deciding how they want their school staff, because they're the ones that know what's happening on the ground in their schools and those unique challenges that they face. But the speaker has said, we are putting all ideas on the table. The committees have already started. Like literally the first week of session, our House Ways and Means Committee had started this work of looking into different proposals to see what we can do, because we know, Vermonters are struggling when it comes to, getting their paychecks every week,
Right.
and it's a problem. And so, again, that's why we're talking about things like gradually raising the minimum wage and paid family leave as some issues to address the economy. But when it comes to property taxes, this committee is looking at ways to make it more fair for Vermonters. And so we'll see those. I'm sure there'll be other ideas. There's some concepts around moving away from property taxes to income.
Right.
And I know that is going to be talked about at great length. So
Yeah.
And
we
we don't
expect
connect
to
with
see-
the federal taxes anymore. We used to be a percentage, right? And they got away from that a
Well,
couple of
where
years
it does
ago.
connect is AGI, because Vermont
Oh.
uses federal
Yep.
AGI as the
Right.
base. It's interesting. It actually looks like there's going to be a $30 million windfall
Right.
from the federal changes for the state. Now, that's not guaranteed.
Right.
That could
And-
evaporate pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I would just say there might be some, positives, but then there are other places where there are negatives,
Right.
and where we may need to help keep people whole, and so
Right.
that's a whole big
Yeah.
conversation. And we have some excellent staff at the State House, and they are still working hard to figure out
complex.
the
Yeah. You
ramifications
do
of the
have
federal
great staff.
tax
We
bill.
should mention that the
Yes.
behind the scenes folks, whatever time you finish at night, next morning the calendars are done, everything's done. It's an amazing group.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It really is,
they're
seriously.
Well,
fantastic.
I've been following the discussion in Ways and Means pretty closely,
Yeah.
and they're working on some interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of the conversations about how do we simplify this, because we have such a complicated property tax system.
Mm-hmm.
There's very few people in the state that understand how it actually works,
Mm-hmm.
and so simplifying it for people so they understand. Here's what I'm paying, and also try to maintain equity. I think we have more equity in our education taxes system than most states do.
Yep,
So
that's true.
how do we maintain that level of equity, or even improve it, but also simplify it so that
Right.
people understand why they're paying what they're paying?
We were talking about some of the goals for what this would look like, and it was simplicity. How can we make it simple, more simple to understand?
Right.
And creating transparency, more transparency around it, and fairness. So I'm glad that you're picking up on some of those themes that we've
Yeah.
been
Yeah,
discussing.
we did a show about a year ago about what questions to ask at town meeting, and it was all mostly about property tax, because if your town, as mine does, Berlin, they really work hard, the school, to get down to their minimum increases, and so you vote for that, and then you get a statewide increase, and you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
I mean, we tried our best. What happened?
Burlington's a good example of this year, right? They came out with a $150,000 cut, which in the scale of the Burlington school budget is basically level funding, but
Don't
but
say that to my school board.
I know it's really any cut
Sounds
is
like
really
a lot.
difficult to make, but essentially, it's like a 0.02% decrease. So it's essentially level funding, but the tax rate's still going up 7%.
Right.
And that's not because of anything that the school board did. It's because it's because of what's going on at the state level. Last year alone, there was a $45 million deficit in the education fund. Over the last 3 years, it totals at $70 million deficit in the education fund. So really, this year's increase is in the statewide property tax rate is to cover that deficit.
But you're sitting in town meeting. I mean, I don't even think the people on our school board can explain.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't explain it to us
like,
either while we're sitting there.
Well, we did our job.
Yeah, exactly.
But we can't. But your tax rate's still going up. Like, what do you say to that?
Yeah, right.
It would just be great to be able to get your tax bill in the mail and see the
exactly.
breakdown.
See the
I think
breakdown.
that would be very helpful.
I think people would be actually fine with that. I mean, as
Yeah.
long as they knew why, what was happening with a good explanation.
Yeah.
Instead of, well, it's all about the state and, well,
When you look at the state, the city, the local, the education, I mean, it is very complex, but also I think, lumping it all together just makes it so much more confusing. So that is something that the committee is working on
Good.
and trying to
and that's
tackle.
Ways and Means, you said?
Yep.
Doing that? Okay, that's
Yeah.
Janet Ansel, right?
Jan said, yeah.
Jan-
So you're sending 2 checks in instead of 1 check, or however you need to break
however,
that up.
yeah. But to just literally see the breakdown,
Right.
like you do
Right.
when you get a receipt at a restaurant,
Yeah.
this is your beverage, this
Well,
is...
I can't speak to how all towns do it, but I know Burlington, when they send it to you, there's 2 line items on there, right? You get your municipal tax rate, you got your local option tax, and then you've got your education tax, right? And they do break it up in line items. I don't know that municipalities are required to do it that way, so you very could easily get a one line, here's
yeah.
your bill.
Here it is.
Yeah.
But even getting 2 separate bills might make sense. It just depends,
Yeah, I just think it would be, I just think anything we can do to make it more transparent is great. And I think that's a good step to help educating people, what are the different things that this bill includes and is taken care of. So,
yeah,
That's good.
absolutely.
so there'll be a lot more work on that.
So I was looking, I was going to bring it tonight, but we probably wouldn't have much time anyway. When I looked at all the bills that were introduced in the House, now, a lot of times the subject matter is a little deceiving with what's in the bill. But it didn't seem to me that the things that we heard from voters last year and the things we've talked about are really are in bills there. And so is it a strategy that you're doing? You've got bills over in the Senate from last year, so that's a continuation of last year. Are you counting on members to do things in committee to get some of these things addressed? Or am I completely missing? I looked at, how some of those bills, like, what are we doing? They didn't seem to talk much about the economy and.
So I would say that it's a mix. So some of the bills do exist and they are being worked on. So like I said, paid family leave,
Right.
minimum wage, workforce development. Now there are other issues like how we fund clean water. That there were a couple proposals that were put out to start the conversation, but the bill will probably end up
A committee bill.
a
or
committee
something.
bill. Now, I'm not saying it will, but another path in which bills come to the floor is as a committee bill, and that's literally the work of the committee comes together,
Right.
and it's introduced that way. And so we are still in the beginning of this legislative session. We just had the deadline for drafting requests, so
right.
all of the bills won't be released until the end of the month. So we
And then
still
you've
have
got
like
the
2
short
weeks
form
left.
that they put in at the last minute because that just holds a space
Right.
for a bill that's going to be contemplated later on.
Yeah, potentially.
Because I really, if I was looking at the bills, I was a little,
You're looking at all the
discouraged.
early ones.
yeah, it's a little discouraged.
I know.
Don't be discouraged.
There wasn't actually. I didn't think there was a whole lot of new bills being introduced this fall. It seemed, or this really in January. It seemed like a lot of them were kind of carrying over from last
Yeah.
year's discussions that had started.
Yeah, I will say that we just had the deadline for drafting
Yeah, that'll
requests.
Yeah,
speed
so there's
up.
probably going to be a whole wave of
Yeah,
them.
that'll
So
speed
like
them
in the
up.
beginning of every, legislative day, we have the part where the speaker will introduce the bills and send
Right.
them to committee. And, I guarantee you, we went from 2, 3, 10, now
Right.
it's going to be like 18,
Right.
30,
Right.
Yeah.
as they get introduced.
Well,
So we're
tell 'em
still
to-
in the beginning
tell 'em to
process
get going.
of that.
Yeah. Before we move on too far, I want to revisit clean water.
Sure.
It's something you had mentioned earlier. That's an issue that I'm pretty passionate about. What are we going to see this year on lake cleanup? I know there's the legislature had moved some funds that were originally allocated for clean water last year into low-income housing. And then there's now some question about how the current funds are being used by the administration and what projects those are going to. What's the legislature looking at this year for those types
So
of
I
things?
touched on the like a long-term funding source. So
Right.
you mentioned that some of the funding for clean water was directed towards low-income and middle-income housing. But again, that was a short term for everything. We want something that is long-term, that is stable and reliable. And so the Senate is starting the lead on that conversation. There's been a couple policies introduced, like a per parcel fee. There's been some ideas put out about creating some sort of clean water authority that would help manage that. So there's a lot of different ideas that are being examined. And I think what everybody wants is a long-term funding source that is reliable.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's early, so those conversations are just, percolating.
Who's your counterpart over in the Senate?
Senator Bray is the chair of the
okay.
Senate Natural Resources Committee. Yeah. So, there's that. There's also more conversations happening just around are the laws on the books that we have working when it comes to clean water.
Right.
So, there's been some recent legislation passed that I think now the committees will go back to just saying, how is this working? Is this keeping our waters clean, especially when it comes to agriculture, conversations ongoing on that front.
I
So
think I
there's-
I read an article, something in Facebook, somebody was, well, where's Canada, where's New York? And I think we had somebody on the show that very clearly said, we have found the problem, and it is us. That we are the major problem with regard to Lake Champlain. So although we'll get some support from Canada and New York, we're it, right?
Well, and so there's not a whole lot of concern in the legislature that the current funds are being spent in the appropriate places. It's not too much of a concern at this point, or is it still kind of early on in that?
I think it's still early on. I know that those conversations, if they haven't already, will be taking
Yeah.
place.
I know the chair of the Natural Resources Committee was a little concerned about where some of the funding was
I thought they
going.
were
Yeah.
putting a plan together and asked for some time for the secretary to put a plan together, because they didn't have one when the money was initially identified.
Yeah, there's been some problems with getting some of the reports and studies from the administration to
Okay.
come back to the legislature. So I think that's delaying a little bit of where we were hoping we could start from, but
Right.
that's okay. We've been doing work over the summer and fall too.
That's
so
great.
Cool.
Yeah. So I forgot one thing when we were talking about education. I read today or yesterday that Secretary DeVos from Washington is pretty much turning the back on Common Core and saying states don't have to worry about Common Core. What will that mean for Vermont? Has anybody talked about that?
I had not heard that. Unfortunately, that it's not surprising coming from the administration.
Is it working for us here in Vermont?
I believe so. I think that there's been a lot of talk about are we providing the right education standards. There's been a lot of conversation about tests and,
Yeah, well,
and what
I
kind of
think that's
tests, when
always-
testing.
Right.
I think when I was in school, they were talking about that. I mean, what is
Yeah.
the right?
Yeah.
who
Well,
knows?
and the Agency of Education is in the middle of transitioning to a proficiency-based test, as well as, so they're moving away from letter grades, and they'll have like a proficient, above proficient, proficient, and below proficient. So those are they're moving towards something like that, and they have it broken out by skill set as opposed, so they get, if it's a history paper you're writing, you'll get graded on, the research work, you'll get rated on the writing, you'll get rated on the concepts, those types of things. So they're looking at it differently, which I think is interesting. I think there's, benefit to doing it that way. But that's even beyond what Common
Sure.
Core is
Yeah.
suggesting.
Yeah. Absolutely. And one of the I don't know if it was recent, as it was I think over the summer when DeVos came out with recommendations around sexual assault on school campuses, and that caused a lot of concern. And we did a lot of work to understand what the implications are, and we found out that it wasn't necessarily a mandatory change.
Right.
So so far what we've heard is campuses are keeping the same protocols and the same rules in place around that, which is good. I think we have a serious issue around sexual assault at campuses across the country, and we're not in Vermont we still have it as well, and we need to take that seriously.
Yeah, well, it's been a serious conversation for a number of years as colleges have had to reevaluate what their policies are and what their procedures are. I know most of the colleges in Vermont have done that, and I would anticipate they're going to continue to do that as they try to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah, we don't want to make it harder for victims.
Well, I would, mom and dad send you away, presumably to a safe place to learn, and
Right.
that's just awful.
Yeah.
Just awful. So let's
awful.
talk the Democratic Party there, Mr. Ben.
So I think it's interesting. We looked at the party platform with the Progressive Party when they were on last week. There's a lot of work goes into those. I think we talked about it even last year
we
when we
did,
were on the show.
Yours is so extensive, it's
Yeah.
very impressive.
What as a party, what kind of process do you go through to agree on a party platform? And what is the framework you have going in? Like, what is we want a platform that does these things?
So the Vermont Democratic Party has a committee that is set up that takes what we have and reviews it and updates it. I think some of it creates a lot of opportunity for feedback and discussion.
Yep.
That's a good
Very
thing.
rigorous
Yeah.
discussion, and has several drafts, and it comes to a vote. When I was executive director of the Vermont Democratic Party a long time ago, I remember this process, and for a lot, it's truly a grassroots organization. It's a process that is led by the people who show up and say, this is what we care about. And a lot of it, is about fairness. It's about equality in every way, racial, women's rights, reproductive rights, housing rights. And so a lot of it is fueled by who is in the room and what they're passionate about and representative of the party.
So usually there's one or two, not always issues, but concepts that really draw people to a particular party. What was it for you that drew you to the Democratic Party? It's like, I want to be part of that, and this is what I want to be part of this organization.
That's a great question. For me, it was very much around women's rights and reproductive freedom, and I think that the party has a long history of not only ensuring access to birth control and health care for women, but also around issues of equal pay.
Which
and
we still struggle with.
Which we
Right.
still struggle with. We're making progress, but we're not there.
Yeah.
And right now, recently, we have some serious issues when it comes to sexual harassment, and we're looking at potentially some prevention work, not only in our building, in the literal state house, but looking at legislation to see what we can do to address some of the issues in the workplace. And so going back to your question, I would say for me that was really important. And I saw, being young, trying to figure out where to go, I saw women leaders in the party that I felt that just kind of inspired me and brought me there. And so that's what drew me.
So I want to touch on one thing that you mentioned in the context of the Me Too movement. How do we get at that issue with legislation? Because this is something I've struggled with. I know Carrie Brown pretty well. She's the executive director of the Vermont Commission on Women, and I've talked to her about income inequality on several occasions and how to address that issue. But I'm curious, it seems like it's a more difficult issue to get at it from a policy perspective. What are you working on at the State House to try to get at this issue of workplace safety for women?
Sure. So we are working on legislation, and it hasn't been released yet, but we're looking at different ways through labor law to strengthen them, to make it more serious. So creating and looking at what we have around retaliation, around what you, like during the hiring process, some of the policies along whether you show what you made or not made. There's a lot of, you touched on that the issues around harassment and equal pay and women in the workplace, they all kind of they interplay a lot together. And so I hope that we will be releasing something shortly that lays out a plan on how we can do that. So that is something that I hope that we're going to be able to release this week, if not next week. So the next time I'm here, we'll be able to talk about it.
We'll have you back to talk
really.
Have you back to talk about it.
I was in Montpelier this Saturday when they had the march.
Yeah, I was there
And
too.
I was very impressed. I mean, fortunately, it wasn't all about Trump. Sorry, people. But anyway, a lot of the women had other signs with them, which said domestic violence and the Me Too movement. So it impressed me that they're paying attention to beyond the Trump-Washington issue, that they're very involved in all of these other issues, which they should be. Yeah. But I got discussing with the people I was sitting at the table, how effective is that march or marches to you as a legislature? Because I know a lot of times when there'd be a march at the State House, legislators would go out to say hi to the folks who are marching. And I said, how effective is that? Or what is effective for you as a legislator?
I think it's effective and helpful to see the messages that people are bringing. I mean, for me, standing there listening to the young women speak about.
Is that little girl? What was?
So
cute.
Muslim Girls for Change.
Yeah.
Every time I hear them speak, it's just so incredibly inspiring and moving, and it's exciting to see youth so engaged.
Right.
And so I think especially when youth are involved, that's really, really important. So I think that's helpful. I also think literally if people care about something a lot, just call or email your legislator. And I've had so many amazing conversations with constituents that help feed into a bill or help with an issue. That was, I think it's very important here with our citizen legislature, our connection to our constituents. 5 or 6 calls on an issue can sway a legislator on an issue.
Absolutely.
Well, you see when they're voting, all those little pink telephone notes keep coming in the droves. But they did it so professionally at the march, which impresses me when it's professional, when you can hear what they're chanting. The part I can't stand is when you don't know what they're saying. But they got to the State House, and it was well orchestrated, and it was nice, because I would think if it gets out of hand and violent, that clearly would turn me off as a legislator.
Yeah, no, I mean, all of them that I have attended have just been so passionate and people just excited to talk to one another about why they're there and what they want to achieve. And so it was really great.
That's a good thing about Vermont. We do it right.
So we have about 30 seconds left. This always goes too quickly. But what else, is there anything that we haven't covered that voters and the public should know about the priorities in the House this year?
Oh my gosh, that's such a great
I have 16 seconds.
So I'll just say this, is that we are, like I said, we are laser focused on working on our economy that helps everyone, not just a few. And we believe that the Vermont dream should be accessible to everyone. And so that is our mission this legislative session, to do that good work and to make a difference.
Works for me.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites. Thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you so much.